Well, well, well. Officer Craig Pullman crouched down, picked up the worn duffel bag with 2 fingers, the way you'd pick up something you found rotting in a ditch, and held it out at arm's length over the wet pavement of Clement Avenue. Somebody's black ass decided to make our sidewalk his living room again. He let go. The bag hit the ground, and he stomped on it, one hard, deliberate boot, and the seam split open like it had been waiting for an excuse. Contents exploded across the wet concrete: a rosary, a folded letter, a laminated photograph, and 4 small navy blue velvet cases that skidded into the gutter and lay there half submerged in the morning slush. Pullman stepped on the photograph on his way back to standing. Didn't even look down. "You people smell that?" He turned to the gathering crowd, waving a hand in front of his nose with a grin stretched wide and ugly. "That's what happens when a black bum thinks he owns a piece of America." Someone in the crowd laughed. Not everyone, but enough. A woman in a yellow coat looked away. A teenage boy stared at his shoes. A man in a business suit checked his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Nobody said stop. Pullman looked back down at the man in the torn jacket and lowered his voice to something worse than a shout. A quiet, satisfied sneer. "You got nothing. You are nothing. Now pick up your garbage and get off my street before I decide this is a crime scene." The man said nothing. He looked at his wife's face pressed into the dirty water, and his jaw went tight once, just once, and then went completely still. Nobody on Clement Avenue knew what was inside those 4 little velvet cases lying in the gutter. In 9 minutes they would, and not one of them would ever be the same. Stay with this story, because what happens on this sidewalk in the next few minutes is something you need to see all the way through. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if this is the kind of story that hits you somewhere real, the subscribe button is right there. Let's get into it. The bench on Clement Avenue was green once. You could still see it if you looked closely. Flecks of original paint caught in the grain of the wood, protected from the weather by 30 years of layered grime. The city had repainted the other benches in Harlow Creek's small downtown district twice since then. This one they had simply stopped noticing. Solomon James Decker had been sleeping on it for 3 years and 2 months. He woke every morning at 5:47 a.m. Not because he had an alarm, but because his body had been wired to that hour since 1985, when a drill sergeant at Fort Benning had decided that 5:47 was the precise moment at which a young man's excuses ran out. 31 years of military service had hammered that clock into his bones so deeply that no amount of homelessness, hunger, or heartbreak had ever managed to unset it. The first thing Saul did every morning before he opened his eyes, before he sat up, before he checked the sky for rain, was fold his blanket. Not roll it. Fold it. Corners squared. Edges aligned. Each crease pressed flat with the heel of his palm. The way Staff Sergeant Greer had taught him in the barracks at Benning in the summer of 1985, his voice a low, controlled thunder. A man who can't make his bed can't make a decision. And a man who can't make a decision gets people killed. Saul had never forgotten it. He folded the blanket now, with the same precision, kneeling on the cold concrete, in the gray, pre-dawn dark breath, fogging in the March air. His right hand moved slower than his left. 3 fingers. On that hand were fused at the second knuckle, the skin across them waxy and tight, burned smooth. Fallujah. November 2004. A detail we'll return to. He tucked the folded blanket under the bench and dropped to the ground for his push-ups. 25. Every morning, without exception. Rain, ice fever, grief, it didn't matter. The number never changed. His left hip screamed at him from push-up 14 onward, the way it always did, the Iraqi shrapnel still lodged against the bone, shifting with every dip and rise. The VA surgeon in 2017 had told him the fragment was too close to the sciatic nerve to remove safely. Sol had nodded, thanked him, and done his push-ups the next morning anyway. When he finished, he knelt on the pavement and reached into the breast pocket of his field jacket. Olive green, fraying at both cuffs. One sleeve repaired with a length of paracord he'd found behind the auto parts store on Madison, and he pulled out the photograph. It was laminated, though the plastic had yellowed at the corners and was peeling away from the edges. The photograph inside was from 2013, taken in the backyard of a house in Decatur that no longer belonged to him. A woman stood in afternoon light wearing a blue sundress, laughing at something off camera, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. Beside her, a younger woman, mid-20s, her mother's cheekbones. Her father's serious eyes was caught mid-laugh too, leaning into the older woman's shoulder. Cora and Renee. Cora had died of a stroke in March of 2017. She had been 54 years old. Sol had been on a plane from Stuttgart, Germany, trying to get home in time. He had not made it. Renee had tried. For 4 years, she had tried driving down from Atlanta on weekends, sending money he mostly refused, calling numbers that sometimes rang out into voicemail. But there is a specific kind of pain that comes from watching a parent disappear in real time, and in 2021, Renee had reached the edge of what she could carry. She had called him on a Tuesday and told him she loved him and couldn't do this anymore. He had told her he understood. He did understand. He did not blame her, not even slightly. He kissed the photograph once on Cora's cheek, where the light caught her face, and slid it back into the breast pocket of his jacket. Next to the 4 small navy blue velvet cases that he kept sewn into the inner lining behind a hidden panel, he had stitched himself with a curved upholstery needle he'd bought at a craft store for 79 cents. He had never opened those cases in public. In 31 years of service, 2 tours, Iraq 1, Afghanistan deployments to places that didn't make the news, Solomon Decker had accumulated certain things. Commendations, scars, a left hip full of metal, a recurring dream about a burning building and the sound of his own name being called from inside it, and 4 small medals in 4 small velvet boxes that he carried against his chest like a second heartbeat. He did not think of them as achievements. He thought of them as debts. Proof of what other men had paid so that he could still be standing. Harlow Creek, Georgia population, 18,400, called itself a patriotic town. The evidence was everywhere. Gold Star plaques on the library wall. A recruiting office on Main Street with a fresh flag changed every Monday. The VFW post on Dunmore Road with its parking lot always half full on Tuesday evenings. Every lamppost on Claimant Avenue flew the stars and stripes from Memorial Day through Veterans Day without interruption. "Thank you for your service" was printed on the marquee outside Harlow Creek Ford dealership. Had been for 11 years. In 3 years and 2 months, almost no one in this patriotic town had learned Solomon Decker's name. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Mothers pulled children closer. A woman at the pharmacy had once asked the manager to remove him from the entrance because he was making her uncomfortable simply by existing near the door. Almost nobody saw him as a man. Almost. His next stop, as it was every morning, was Pruitt's lunch counter on the corner of Clement and 4th. Not the front door. The side window. And as he turned the corner that cold March morning, the brown paper bag already waiting on the sill, he noticed something he had noticed twice already that morning. The same patrol car moving slowly down Clement Avenue, the driver's eyes fixed on him through the glass. Sol picked up the paper bag. He kept walking. He did not look back. Some things he thought you don't need to look at to know are coming. Agnes Pruitt had been opening that side window at 7:15 a.m. for 3 years and 1 month. She did it the same way every time. Unlatch the hook. push the frame out 6 inches exactly 6, because beyond that the hinge squeaked and startled the breakfast crowd inside. Set the brown paper bag on the sill. Step back. Wait for the sound of his footsteps on the gravel path beside the building. She never called out to him. He never knocked. They had arrived at this arrangement the way 2 dignified people arrive at most things, without ever discussing it through a series of small gestures that accumulated over time into something that mattered. This morning's bag, 2 buttermilk biscuits, still warm from the oven, 3 strips of thick-cut bacon, a small stainless thermos of black coffee, no sugar, she had learned that in the 2nd week. And at the very bottom, tucked under a folded paper towel, a pair of wool socks still in their packaging. It was March in Georgia, which meant the nights still dropped into the 30s, and the concrete held the cold long after sunrise. Saul lifted the bag from the sill. He looked inside. He saw the socks. He stood still for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his field jacket and produced a small square of paper folded once. He set it on the windowsill and weighted it with a pebble from the gravel path. His fingers, even the fused ones, moved with a precise, practiced care that seemed at odds with everything else about the morning. Agnes watched from 2 steps back in the kitchen, flour still on her hands from the biscuits. The square of paper was an origami crane, small enough to sit in the center of a palm. He had learned to fold them in a VA art therapy program in 2019 during his one serious attempt to engage with the system before the system made clear it was not particularly interested in engaging back. The program had been defunded after 8 months. Sol had kept folding. Agnes kept every one of them in a wide-mouth mason jar on the windowsill above the register where the morning light came through and made the paper glow. There were 47 cranes in that jar. She had counted them the previous Sunday. She waited until his footsteps faded down the gravel path before she stepped forward and took the crane from the sill. She unfolded it carefully. She always unfolded them carefully, because inside each one he had written a single sentence. Today's sentence. The red-tailed hawk was back on the courthouse roof this morning. Agnes pressed the paper flat against her palm and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Her son Tyler had been 23 years old when the army sent him home in a flag-draped casket from Kandahar in October of 2009. He had been a corporal in the 101st Airborne. He had been funny and stubborn and a terrible cook, and he had called her every Sunday without fail from wherever in the world he happened to be stationed. And then one Sunday the phone had not rung, and it had never rung on a Sunday since. His photograph hung above the register in a simple black frame. Dress uniform cap squared the particular expression of a young man trying to look older than he feels. Agnes looked at it every morning when she opened the register, and every evening when she closed it. Saul had never once asked about the photograph, but she had noticed in the earliest weeks of their side window arrangement that whenever he passed the front of the diner, he slowed just slightly near the window. His eyes would find the photograph inside. They would rest there for 2 or 3 seconds, and then he would walk on. She had never told him about Tyler. Something about the way he looked at that photograph told her he already understood something essential about it without needing the words. Agnes had spent the last 4 months doing something no one else in Harlow Creek had apparently thought to do. She had been writing letters to the VA hospital in Decatur, to the Regional Veterans Services Coordinator, to Congressman Aldrich's district office on Perry Street, 6 blocks from where Sol slept. She had typed them on the old Dell computer in the back office and printed them on Pruitt's lunch counter letterhead, the letterhead with the small American flag printed in the corner that her husband Dale had designed before he died. The responses, when this came at all, were form letters. We appreciate your concern. Your inquiry has been forwarded to the appropriate department. Thank you for your service to our veterans community. She kept every response in a manila folder under the counter clipped to her carbon copies of the original letters. The folder was getting thick. From the front of this diner, Saul was now visible through the window crossing Clement Avenue toward the Veterans Memorial. On the far side, the brown paper bag tucked under his arm. Agnes watched him stop at the granite wall. She watched his lips begin to move. Every morning, 34 names. She had once counted the seconds it took him. 11 minutes and 20 seconds on a morning when she'd had nothing better to do than stand at the window with her coffee and watch a man pay a debt the rest of the town had forgotten it owed. Across Clement Avenue, a patrol car slowed almost to a stop. The driver's window was down despite the cold. Agnes recognized the car. She recognized the driver. Her hand tightened on her coffee mug. Not today, she thought. Please, not today. But Craig Pullman's patrol car was already pulling to the curb, and the engine, when it cut, made a sound like a door closing on something that couldn't be undone. Deshaun Miles was 16 years old, and he had seen this before. Not this exact corner, not this exact man, but this exact thing. The patrol car pulling too slowly to the curb. The door opening with that particular unhurried swing that meant the officer inside had already decided how the next 10 minutes were going to go. Deshaun had seen it happen to his uncle Marcus, outside a convenience store. In 2021 had seen it happen to his neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, in front of his own house, the summer before that. He had grown up in a world where certain men in certain uniforms moved through certain neighborhoods with a specific gravity, not the gravity of law, but the gravity of habit, of certainty, of never having been told no by anyone whose opinion they respected. He raised his phone before Pullman's boot had even hit the pavement. Horizontal. Steady. Red dot blinking. His uncle Marcus had come back from Mosul in 2008 and never quite come all the way back. He had a poster on his bedroom wall, laminated edges curled of every living Medal of Honor recipient. He made Deshaun read their names, sometimes made him learn what each one had done. So you know what a human being is capable of, Marcus said, so you don't forget. Deshaun kept his phone steady and watched. Pullman came around the front of the patrol car with the rolling, loose-shouldered walk of a man who expected space to be made for him. Officer Pete Rourke followed 2 steps behind Younger, tighter his hand hovering near his belt without touching it. Rourke had been on the force for 7 weeks. He had spent 6 of those weeks quietly cataloging the distance between what he had been trained to do and what he was watching Craig Pullman do instead. Saul had already set Agnes's paper bag on the bench beside him. He stood straight, not rigid, not defiant, but the particular upright posture of a man whose spine had been trained over decades to carry weight without advertising it. His hands were clasped in front of him, visible still. "Good morning, officer," Saul said. His voice was even, measured. The voice of a man who had been in rooms where the wrong tone got people killed, and had learned, therefore, to make his tone a tool rather than a reflex. Pullman stopped 3 feet away and crossed his arms. "Morning." He looked Saul up and down the way you look at something on the bottom of your shoe. "You sleep on that bench again last night?" "Yes, sir." Pullman rocked back slightly on his heels. "See, that's a problem. That bench is city property. Sleeping on city property is a violation of Municipal Ordinance 14B. You know that?" "I'm aware of the ordinance, sir." Something shifted in Pullman's expression, a small tightening around the eyes. He did not like being answered that way. He had expected either fear or belligerence, and Saul had given him neither, and that particular gap between expectation and reality was the thing that made men like Pullman dangerous. "You got ID," Pullman said. "Yes, sir. May I reach into my breast pocket?" Pullman's jaw moved. He looked at Rourke briefly, a look that said, "You hearing this," then back at Saul. "What you need permission to reach into your own pocket?" Go ahead, Professor. Saul moved the way he always moved when a weapon was nearby, and tensions were elevated slowly, hands telegraphing every motion, two fingers only deliberate as a surgeon. He reached into the breast pocket of his field jacket and produced a laminated card worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. He held it out with both hands. Pullman snatched it with one. He looked at it. His eyes moved across the text. Something happened on his face, a small, involuntary flicker, and then it was gone, replaced by the performance. Solomon J. Decker. He read the name aloud with the flat effect of someone reading a grocery list. Master Sergeant, United States Army, retired. He looked up. This real? Yes, sir. Where'd you get it? Saul blinked once. It was issued to me, sir, by the Department of Defense. Uh-huh. Pullman turned the card over, looked at the back, turned it over again. Then he flicked it a sharp, contemptuous snap of his wrist, and the card spun into the gutter at Saul's feet, landing in the thin film of meltwater collecting along the curb. Behind Pullman, Rourke flinched. He looked down at the card in the gutter. He looked at Saul's face. He looked at the card again. Then he crouched quickly and picked it up. He meant to hand it back to Saul. Pullman looked at him. Just looked, no words, no gesture. Rourke straightened up and put the card in his own pocket instead. His face had the expression of a man making a choice he already knew he'd spend a long time thinking about. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. 8 people. Now maybe 10. Deshawn's stream was at 200 viewers and climbing. An elderly white man in a VFW cap, Earl Stuckey, though no one in the crowd knew his name yet, had slowed his morning walk and stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, one hand resting on the top of his cane, watching with the still attention of someone who has seen enough of the world to recognize a particular kind of wrong when it's standing right in front of him. Pullman stepped closer to Saul. Not enough to be obviously threatening. Exactly enough. Here's what I'm going to do, he said, his voice dropping into the register he used when he wanted to make clear that the performance was over and the reality was beginning. I'm going to ask you one more time to move on. And if you don't, I'm going to find 14 other ordinances you're in violation of, and we're going to have a very long morning together. You understand me, son? Saul held his gaze. I understand you, officer, he said quietly. He did not move. And Pullman's expression shifted from contempt into something colder, something that had been waiting under the surface the whole time, patient as a debt. All right, Pullman said softly. All right, then. He reached out and unclipped his radio with one hand. With the other, he grabbed the strap of Saul's duffel bag, and what happened next took less than 4 seconds, and changed everything. The duffel bag hit the pavement with a sound that was somehow too loud for its size. Pullman had swung it, not thrown. It swung it in a slow, deliberate arc, the way you swing something when you want the watching to be part of the point. It landed on its side and skidded 6 inches across the wet concrete, the worn canvas catching on a crack in the sidewalk and splitting along the bottom seam. Saul did not move. Pullman planted his boot on the bag and looked at the crowd. The look said, "Are you watching? Good. This is how it works." "Let's see what we're working with," he said, crouching down and unzipping the main compartment with a single pull. He reached inside with no more ceremony than a man rummaging through a bin at a garage sale. The first thing he pulled out was the rosary. Black wooden beads worn absolutely smooth from decades of handling the cross at the end, darkened by the oils of 1,000 prayers. Pullman held it up between 2 fingers, dangled it like something mildly disgusting. "Religious man, huh?" He let his eyes move to the crowd performing. That's always the first sign. They find God right around the time they figure out it's good for sympathy. He dropped the rosary onto the wet pavement. The cross struck the concrete, and one of the decade beads cracked clean off and rolled into the gutter. Agnes made a sound from the doorway of the diner. A small, raw sound, like something punctured. Sol's eyes followed the rosary to the ground. He said nothing. His breathing was controlled in for 4 counts, out for 4. A technique a therapist at the VA had taught him in 2016 in one of the 12 sessions he'd managed to attend before his case was transferred, and the new appointment slot was 3 months out, and by then the address they had on file for him was no longer valid. Pullman reached back into the bag. The green notebook came next. It was small, 4 inches by 6 spiral-bound, the cover soft from being folded back on itself thousands of times. He flipped it open with his thumb, scanned a page. His mouth curved. "Well, look at this." He cleared his throat with theatrical gravity and read aloud, his voice sliding into a mocking lilt. "Today, the red-tailed hawk was back on the courthouse roof." He looked up. "Ooh, that's beautiful, Chief. Real Hemingway stuff." Someone in the crowd laughed. Not everyone. But the ones who did laughed a little too quickly, the way people laugh when they're afraid of being on the wrong side, and laughter feels like a safe place to stand. Pullman tore the page out, let it drift from his fingers onto the wet sidewalk where the water took the ink in seconds. Agnes stepped forward from her doorway. "That's enough, Craig." Pullman didn't look at her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay on your side of the street." "This is my side of the street. This is my door. And this is a police matter. Step back." Agnes did not step back. She crossed her arms and stood in her doorway, flour still on her apron, chin level, the particular stillness of a woman who had already lost the thing she was most afraid of losing, and therefore could not be threatened by the loss of anything smaller. Rourke looked at her. He looked at the torn page dissolving in the puddle. He looked at the back of Pullman's head. Something was happening behind his eyes, a slow accumulating arithmetic of wrong things added together. Pullman's hand found the laminated photograph. He pulled it out and held it up, squinting. Cora in the blue sundress. Renee, mid-laugh, leaning into her mother's shoulder. Yard indicator. Afternoon light. 2013. The happiest Sol had been in his adult life, compressed into a 3x5 rectangle of laminated paper. "This your family?" Pullman's voice was almost gentle. Almost. "Or did you lift this from somebody's wallet? Because I'll tell you, these women look too well dressed to know a man who smells like you do." Sol's jaw tightened. One visible involuntary movement. Then stillness. "That is my wife," he said quietly. "Her name is Cora. She passed away in 2017. Please handle it carefully, sir." Pullman looked at the photograph, looked at Sol, looked back at the photograph. "Cora," he said the name the way you say a word in a language you find faintly ridiculous. "Well, Cora's not here to see what you've come to, is she?" He dropped the photograph face down into the puddle at his feet. "Pick it up," Sol said. His voice was still quiet, but something had entered it, not anger, something older and heavier than anger. "Please." Pullman looked at the photograph in the water, looked at Sol, and then with the slow deliberateness of a man making a philosophical statement, he placed the toe of his boot on the photograph and pressed down. "Oops," he said. Behind Pullman, Rourke turned away. Just for a second, turned away, and looked at the sky with the expression of a man trying to keep something inside his chest from becoming something visible on his face. Deshawn's live stream was at 1,400 viewers now. The chat was moving fast. Someone had typed, "Is this real?" in all capitals, and the response had come immediately from a dozen different users. "Yes. Harlow Creek, Georgia, right now." Earl Stuckey, standing at the edge of the crowd, had not moved. His knuckles were white on the top of his cane. His eyes were fixed on Pullman with the flat measuring attention of a man counting something. Pullman straightened up. He dusted his hands together. He looked at Saul with the expression of a man who had been waiting to arrive at the next part. "Now," he said, "let us talk about what's in that inside pocket, because I can see something in there, something that doesn't belong on a man living on a bench." Saul closed his eyes. Just for 1 second. 2. "Sir," he said, "those are personal items. They have meaning to me. I am asking you with respect, I'm not asking what they mean to you." When Pullman's voice had gone flat and final. "I'm telling you to take the jacket off. Now." And somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered to the man beside her, "Somebody needs to do something." And the man beside her said nothing. And nobody did anything. Not yet. Saul did not take the jacket off. Not out of defiance. Defiance was a young man's response, and Saul had not been a young man in a long time. He did not take the jacket off because inside that jacket, sewn behind a hidden panel in the inner lining, were the only 4 things left in his possession that connected him to the life he had lived before the bench and the cold and the years of being looked through by people walking past on their way to somewhere that mattered. He had patched that lining himself. Curved needle upholstery thread, 17 stitches he had counted carefully because precision was the last form of dignity available to him, and he had refused to surrender it. "Sir," he said, "please." Pullman grabbed the front of the jacket with both hands. The fabric was 31 years old. It had been through Mogadishu and Fallujah and the mountains of Kunar province, and 4 years of Harlow Creek winters, and it had held through all of it. But it had not been made to withstand this, the specific, contemptuous force of a man who wanted an audience to see him take something apart. The inner lining tore along the seam with a sound like old paper giving up, and the 4 navy blue velvet cases fell. They dropped in a cascade, 1, 2, 3, 4, tumbling from the ruined lining and striking the wet concrete of Clement Avenue in a tight cluster. One of them caught the edge of the curb, and the impact popped the clasp. The lid swung open. A pale blue silk ribbon caught the morning light. A 5-pointed gold star gleamed against the velvet interior. Pullman didn't see it. He was still talking. "What is this? What did you take? Where did you get these?" He bent and scooped up the open case without looking at it, his eyes still on Saul's face, still performing. "Pawn shop. You clean out somebody's display case. Stolen valor is a federal offense, you understand me." He held the open case up, finally looked at it. His mouth kept moving for a moment. Then it stopped. He turned the case in his hand. He looked at the ribbon. He looked at the star. He read something on the interior of the lid. His lips moved, and then his face did a complicated thing, a thing it was clearly not accustomed to doing, a thing that involved the slow collapse of certainty. "This is plastic," he said, but his voice had changed. This is a costume. This is some kind of—" He didn't finish the sentence, because the crowd had gone quiet. Not the nervous, shuffling quiet of people deciding whether to pay attention. A different quiet entirely. The kind that arrives when a group of people begin to understand something at different speeds, and the ones who understand it first go very, very still. Deshaun Miles understood it first. He was 16 years old, and his uncle Marcus had a poster on his bedroom wall, and Deshaun had stared at that poster for hours over the years, had memorized the ribbon colors, the way other kids memorized sports statistics, had learned the names and the actions and the dates, because Marcus said so. You know what a human being is capable of. He was zoomed in now, fully, completely, his hands absolutely steady, and in the viewfinder of his phone he could see the pale blue silk and the gold star, and the 5 points and the crescent of white stars stitched across the ribbon. He whispered into his live stream, his voice dropping to something barely above breath. Chat. A pause. Chat, that's a Medal of Honor. The chat stopped moving. For 3 full seconds, an eternity in live stream time, nobody typed anything. Then it exploded. Deshawn's viewer count had been at 1,400 when Pullman grabbed the jacket. It was at 6,000 now, and climbing with a speed that felt like something accelerating toward impact. Agnes Pruitt, across the street in her doorway, had seen the ribbon the moment the case opened. She had seen her son's commendation medal enough times to know what a military decoration looked like. She had seen enough photographs of Tyler's ceremony to know that the pale blue ribbon meant something specific and enormous. Her hand went to the doorframe. Her knees unlocked. She gripped the wood and held on. Earl Stuckey, VFW, Post, 4417, had been standing at the edge of the crowd for 4 minutes. He was 77 years old. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He had sat in rooms with decorated men, and he knew without any uncertainty from 15 feet away exactly what he was looking at. His right hand rose slowly. Not all the way. It stopped at chest height, hovering, because he needed to be standing closer to be sure, and he was an old man with a cane, and the crowd was between him and the truth. He began to move through the crowd, slowly, deliberately. People made way for him without knowing why. Pullman picked up the second case, opened it. Silver star, 3rd purple heart, the oak leaf clusters catching the light. 4th distinguished service crossed the eagle and the cross in silver and gold. He held them all, now 1 in each hand, 2 cases balanced open in his palms. He looked at them. He looked at Saul. He opened his mouth. "These are fake," he said. "These have to be—" A car door opened, not loudly. Quietly, precisely the door of a second patrol car that had pulled to the curb 30 seconds ago, without anyone noticing, because all attention had been on Pullman and the 4 open cases in his hands. A woman stepped out of the driver's side. Sergeant Denise Okafor was 41 years old, 5'6", and moved through the world with the economy of motion that belongs to people who have spent years in environments where unnecessary movement gets you noticed, and getting noticed gets you killed. She had 18 years on the Harlow Creek Force. She had 5 years before that as a United States Army military police sergeant. She had been briefed on nothing. She had simply been 2 blocks away when the call came in, and she had driven over expecting a standard disturbance on Clement Avenue. She stepped onto the sidewalk, and her eyes swept the scene in one practiced motion. The crowd, the phones, the torn jacket, the bleeding man. When did he start bleeding? The thin red line above Saul's left eyebrow, the rookie's face, and Pullman standing in the middle of the sidewalk holding 4 open velvet cases in his hands. She stopped walking. Not slowed. Stopped. Her right foot was forward. Her left foot was back. She was frozen mid-stride on a public sidewalk in a posture that suggested every circuit in her body had simultaneously tried to send a different signal. Officer Brianna Casper, stepping out of the passenger side, walked directly into Okafor's back. "Sarge, what?" Okafor didn't answer. She couldn't. She was already moving again, 3 steps, 4, crossing the sidewalk with the slow, irreversible momentum of someone walking toward something they cannot look away from. Her lips parted. No sound came out. And Earl Stuckey, arriving at the front of the crowd at that exact moment, looked at what Pullman was holding and removed his VFW cap with both hands and pressed it over his heart. Denise Okafor had seen a Medal of Honor once before in her life. It had been at Fort Myer, Virginia, in the spring of 2006 at the retirement ceremony of a sergeant major she had served under briefly at Bagram. The medal had been displayed in a case on a table draped in blue velvet, and a 2-star general had spoken for 20 minutes about what the man had done to earn it. And the room had been so quiet during those 20 minutes that you could hear the heating system cycling on and off in the walls. She had never forgotten what that ribbon looked like. She was looking at it now. She walked past Pullman the way you walk past furniture, without acknowledgement, without eye contact, as if he had not yet risen to the level of something requiring a response. She crossed the wet pavement and stopped in front of Solomon Decker, who was standing against the brick wall of the hardware store with one hand pressed flat against the mortar for balance, blood from the cut above his eyebrow tracking down the side of his nose in a thin red line. She looked at his face. Not at the blood, not at the torn jacket, not at the bench, or the duffel bag, or any of the wreckage surrounding him. At his face, at his eyes. The way you look at a person when you want them to understand that you are actually seeing them. "Sir," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Will you look at me, please?" Sol's eyes, which had been fixed on a point somewhere beyond the brick wall, somewhere thousands of miles and 2 decades away, came slowly back to the present. They found Okafor's face. 4 years of tired lived in those eyes. The specific exhaustion of a man who has been treated as invisible for so long that being seen feels briefly like a threat. Okafor held his gaze. Then she turned to the 4 cases still in Pullman's hands. She held out her own hands, palms up, and said quietly, without inflection, "Give those to me." Pullman blinked. "Sarge, this man has stolen. Give them to me, Craig." Something in her voice closed the conversation. Pullman placed the 4 cases in her hands, with the uncertain movements of a man who has just noticed that the ground under him might not be as solid as he thought. Okafor turned away from him completely. She opened each case with hands that were not entirely steady. She read each engraving in turn, her lips moving in the silent arithmetic of recognition. Silver star. Purple heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. Distinguished Service Cross. And the first one. The one that was still open. The one that had caught the light when it hit the curb. Medal of Honor. Master Sergeant Solomon J. Decker, 75th Ranger Regiment, for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. Fallujah, Iraq, November 9th, 2004. Okafor's lips stopped moving. She had read a training document at Bagram in 2005, a 3-page account of an action in Fallujah that had been circulated through the MP units as an example of what the citation language above and beyond the call of duty actually meant when translated from formal text into what a human body had done in the dark on a specific night in a specific city. She had read it twice. She had memorized 3 sentences of it. Every MP in that post had. The man described in those 3 sentences was standing in front of her with blood on his face and a torn jacket and 4 years of sleeping on a bench pressed into every line of his body. She stood up straight. She closed each case gently. She held them together in both hands for a moment, the way you hold something you have been trusted with. Then she turned to face Saul directly, and she squared her shoulders, and she took one breath, a single, slow, deliberate breath, and she raised her right hand to her temple. Sharp. Precise. Textbook perfect. The salute of someone who was trained to do it and means it completely. Beside her, Brianna Casper had been watching. Casper was 33 years old and an Air Force reservist, and on her left wrist under her uniform sleeve, she wore a black POW bracelet engraved with the name of a pilot who had been shot down over Laos in 1971 and never came home. Her father had given it to her the morning she left for her first deployment and told her, "The bracelet is not jewelry. It's a promise. You carry the ones who didn't make it back." She understood what Okafor's salute meant before she could have explained it in words. She raised her right hand beside Okafor's. 2 women. side by side on a public sidewalk, right hands at their temples, backs straight as flagpoles, saluting a bleeding black man in a torn jacket who had been called nothing and trash, and a stain on a white sidewalk not 10 minutes before. Earl Stuckey, at the front of the crowd, completed the motion his hand had been attempting for the last 3 minutes. He brought it to his temple and locked it there. His arm was trembling. He did not lower it. Rourke, standing 2 paces behind Pullman, took 2 steps back. His right hand rose slowly, uncertainly, and then with the sudden decisiveness of someone choosing a side, snapped into position at his temple. His face was wet. He hadn't noticed until now. The crowd on Clement Avenue did not understand what they were seeing. They were laughing, some of them, the uncomfortable, nervous laughter of people confronted with something that doesn't fit any category they have available. Is this a joke? Is this a drill? What is happening? On Deshawn's live stream, 22,000 viewers watched in real time as someone in the chat typed, "Why are they saluting him?" in all capitals, and the response came from 50 people simultaneously. Look at what he's holding. Look at what she's holding. Pullman's voice came from behind Okafor, tighter, now the performance stripped away and something rawer underneath. Sarge, what are you doing? This man is a thief. I watched him. He had stolen property. Okafor did not move, did not turn. Her salute remained locked. Sol looked at the 2 women in front of him. He looked at Rourke. He looked at Earl Stuckey. He looked at the crowd, confused and laughing, and beginning, some of them, the ones paying closest attention, to stop laughing. At ease, he said softly. Please, all of you, at ease. His voice was gentle, not commanding. The voice of a man who had given enough orders in his life that he no longer needed volume to be heard. Okafor dropped her salute. So did Casper. So did Rourke, after a half-second delay, as if his arm needed a moment to accept the instruction. Both women were crying. Neither had noticed yet. Okafor turned to face the street. She held the Medal of Honor case open above her head, the pale blue ribbon and gold star visible to every person on the sidewalk, and she took a breath that filled her completely. And what came out of her next was not a police officer's voice. It was a soldier's voice, and it carried. I need everyone on this street to stop what they're doing and listen to me. The laughter died. The street went quiet. And Clement Avenue, Harlow Creek, Georgia, a town that had walked past this man every morning for 3 years and 2 months, finally at last, went still enough to hear the truth. Denise Okafor had not prepared a speech. There was no script, no notes, no carefully constructed sequence of arguments. There was only 18 years of watching this town be what it was, and 5 years before that of serving a country that asked everything of certain people, and then forgot to ask their names, and the 4 open velvet cases in her hands, and a bleeding man standing against a brick wall who deserved better than everything that had happened on this sidewalk this morning. She started with the medal. This, she said, holding the first case high and steady, is the Medal of Honor. If you don't know what that means, I am going to tell you right now, and I need you to understand every word. Her voice was controlled, but not calm controlled, the way a river is controlled by its banks. The pressure visible, the force real. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration the United States government can award to a human being. It is presented personally by the President. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be faked. She looked directly at Pullman when she said the last sentence. There are fewer than 60 living recipients in this entire country. 60. In a nation of 330 million people. She opened the second case and held it up beside the first. Silver Star. Awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. This is the 3rd highest military combat decoration in existence. Third case. Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. This man has been wounded in combat. Not once, 3 separate times. 3 times he was injured in service to this country, and 3 times he returned to duty. 4th case. Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor itself, awarded for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. She lowered her arms. She looked at the crowd, at every face she could find, and she made sure they were looking back before she continued. The man that Officer Pullman has been kicking and cursing and bleeding on this sidewalk for the last 20 minutes is Master Sergeant Solomon James Decker, United States Army 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. He served this country for 31 years. She paused. Let that number sit. On the night of November 9th, 2004 in Fallujah, Iraq, Master Sergeant Decker's unit came under ambush in a residential corridor. 2 vehicles were disabled by IED detonations. 4 soldiers were trapped in a burning personnel carrier. Her voice did not waver, but it slowed each word, placed with the care of someone who knows that the words carry weight, and that weight must be respected. Master Sergeant Decker went back into the fire, twice. He pulled all 4 men clear. He then carried 2 of them, 2 wounded soldiers who could not walk across open ground under active mortar fire, to the extraction point. She stopped. The burns on his hands that you can see right now, the fused fingers on his right hand, those happened that night. He finished the extraction with those injuries. He did not stop. The crowd was absolutely still. A child near the back asked his mother something in a whisper. The mother did not answer. She was staring at Sol. "I want to tell you one more thing," Okafor said. Her voice had changed, not softer, but more direct, the way a voice changes when it stops performing and starts simply telling the truth. "I served at Bagram Air Base in 2005. Every military police unit on that post was given a document. 3 pages. An account of the Fallujah action I just described. We were told to read it and remember it, because it was an example of what those words above and beyond the call of duty actually mean when a human being lives them in the dark." She looked at Sol. "I memorized 3 sentences of that document. I have never forgotten them, and I did not know until this morning that the man those sentences described had been sleeping on a bench in this town for 3 years. She turned to face the memorial wall on Clement Avenue and pointed. 2 of the names on that wall, Private First Class Raymond Gage and Corporal Leon Turrentine, they came home in caskets instead of body bags because this man carried them to the extraction point. Both of them. That night in Fallujah. Their names are on your memorial, and this man put them there in the only way that mattered, when Agnes Pruitt had crossed the street. No one had seen her leave the doorway. She had simply appeared, moving through the crowd with the quiet persistence of someone who has decided that watching from a distance is no longer an option. She came to stand beside Sol. She did not touch him. She simply stood there, flour still on her apron, close enough that their arms were almost touching. And the message of her presence was so clear it required no translation. Earl Stuckey, his salute finally lowered, spoke from the front of the crowd. His voice was old, but it carried. "My name is Earl Stuckey. I command VFW Post 4417 on Dunmore Road." He did not shout. He did not need to. I have walked past this man for 2 years. I knew he was a veteran. I could see it in how he carried himself. And I did not stop. His jaw tightened. "I am ashamed of that. I am standing here telling you I am ashamed of that." Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. Deshawn's live stream, 58,000 viewers. The chat had stopped being a chat. It had become a single, sustained, collective sound, the textual equivalent of an entire room going silent, and then erupting at once. Captain Felix Moreau arrived in an unmarked vehicle. He had been briefed by radio. He stepped out of the car, and took in the scene in the practiced way of a 22-year veteran, and whatever political calculation he attempted in the first 3 seconds of looking at Saul's face and the 4 open cases in Okafor's hands, it resolved quickly and completely. He walked to Saul first. He stopped in front of him. He looked at him for a long moment. "Sir," he said, "I am Captain Felix Moreau, commanding officer of Harlow Creek PD. I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate words for right now, but I am going to try to make this right beginning in the next 60 seconds, and I need you to know that I mean that." Saul looked at him. "I believe you," Saul said quietly. "Thank you, Captain." Moreau turned around. "Pullman," his voice had gone flat and final. "Service weapon on the hood of the vehicle." Pullman stared at him. "Captain, I had no way of knowing. Weapon on the hood, now." The gun went on the hood, the badge followed, and Craig Pullman, 15-year veteran 17, closed complaints, a man who had operated for years in the certainty that the institution would always absorb whatever he chose to do. Inside it stood on a public sidewalk with empty hands while 58,000 people watched. "Officer Pullman, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full internal affairs investigation." Moreau did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Officer Casper, escort him to my vehicle." Casper walked Pullman to the car. Pullman looked at the crowd as he passed. Not one face met his. Not one. The paramedics arrived at 8:04 a.m. 2 of them, a young woman named Torres and a man named Garrett, both in their 30s, both moving with the brisk efficiency of people who have learned to read a situation in the first 10 seconds. Torres reached Soul First Kit, already open gloved hands raised to signal she meant no harm. "Sir, I need to look at that cut above your eye. May I?" "Go ahead," Soul said. She cleaned the wound assessed. It reached for the butterfly bandages. "This should really have stitches, sir. I'd like to take you in." "Butterfly bandage will hold," Soul said. "Thank you, ma'am." Torres looked at him. She looked at the 4 velvet cases that Okafor had placed carefully in Saul's hands when Moreau arrived. She looked at the Medal of Honor ribbon against the pale blue silk. She finished applying the bandage with hands that had gone slightly unsteady. Garrett behind her had turned away toward the ambulance. He stayed turned away for a moment longer than necessary. Agnes was already talking quietly to Captain Moreau on the sidewalk. She had the manila folder, the one from under the counter, thick with 4 months of unanswered letters to the VAA and the congressman's office. She pressed it into Moreau's hands with the composed determination of a woman delivering evidence she has been holding on to for a very long time. "Every letter I sent," she said. "Every non-response I got back. Dates, names, reference numbers. It's all there." Moreau looked at the folder. He looked at Agnes. He nodded once, slowly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "This matters." At 8:17 a.m., Agnes Pruitt walked Solomon Decker through the front door of Pruitt's lunch counter for the first time. Not the side window, not the gravel path. The front door with the bell above it that rang when it opened, and the warm smell of biscuits and coffee hitting them both at once, and the breakfast crowd inside going completely silent as the 2 of them walked to the window table in the corner. The best table, the one with the view of Clement Avenue and the memorial wall, and sat down across from each other. Agnes went to the kitchen and came back with coffee and a plate of biscuits and 2 fried eggs, and set it in front of Saul without a word. Then she sat down across from him and poured her own coffee. And for a moment, they just sat there. 2 people who had been exchanging paper bags and origami cranes through a side window for 3 years, finally in the same room at the same table in the same light. Saul looked up at the photograph above the register. Tyler Pruitt, dress uniform cap, squared the expression of a young man trying to look older than he felt. He went very still. 101st Airborne, he said quietly. It was not a question. Yes, Agnes said. Kandahar, 2009. Sol looked at the photograph for another moment. I knew of his unit, he said. They were good men. Every one of them. Agnes pressed her lips together. She nodded. She did not cry. She had decided somewhere on the walk across the street that she was done crying for today, that today required something steadier than tears. So she nodded, and she picked up her coffee, and she looked out the window at Clement Avenue. And after a moment, Sol picked up his coffee too. They sat like that for a long time. Not talking. Just two people who had both lost something enormous sharing the particular quiet of those who have learned to carry loss without letting it become the only thing they are. Outside Clement Avenue was changing by the hour. Deshawn's video hit 12 million views by 6 p.m. By the following morning, it had reached 42 million. The hashtag Salute for the Soldier trended nationally for 4 consecutive days. Cable news ran the clip on a loop. A producer from a morning network show was on a flight to Atlanta by Tuesday evening. General Constance Webb, 4-star, retired former Joint Chiefs, the woman who had written Sol's Medal of Honor recommendation in a forward operating base in Fallujah in November 2004, watched the video at 11 p.m. in her apartment in Washington, D.C. She watched it twice. Then she called her assistant. "Get me on the first flight to Atlanta," she said, "and get me the name of the precinct commander in Harlow Creek, Georgia." The FBI Civil Rights Division opened a file on Craig Pullman within 36 hours of the video going viral. It was not their first file with his name in it. Pullman's 17 prior internal complaints were pulled and reviewed by a federal investigator who spent 4 days reading through them and emerged from the process with the expression of someone who has confirmed something they suspected and wishes they hadn't. 4 of the complainants, emboldened by the public nature of what had happened on Clement Avenue, contacted the precinct and asked to refile. Among them, Tasha Greer, 22, a black nursing student at Georgia State, who still had photographs of the bruising from a traffic stop in 2023, where Pullman had told her on camera, it turned out on a gas station security feed that nobody had subpoenaed until now that she should learn how to act before she drove through certain neighborhoods. Pete Rourke walked into the Internal Affairs office at 9 a.m. on the morning after the incident. He had not been asked to come. He sat down across from the investigator and gave a full, detailed voluntary statement. When he was done, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed Sol's military ID on the desk between them. He had kept it in his pocket since the moment Pullman had stared him into putting it there, instead of handing it back. "I should have given this back to him immediately," Rourke said. "I want that in the record." It went in the record. Casper's body cam footage, all 31 minutes of it, time-stamped and unedited, was uploaded to her personal cloud within an hour of the incident and mirrored to the precinct server. It captured everything: the ID being flicked into the gutter, the photograph being ground under Pullman's boot, the torn jacket, the 4 cases falling, and in the final minutes, at an angle that Casper confirmed she had adjusted deliberately, a clear, unobstructed shot of the Medal of Honor lying open on the wet pavement of Clement Avenue, while Pullman stood over it calling it fake. Denise Okafor was promoted to lieutenant within 2 weeks. She was named head of a newly created Community Accountability Division with a direct reporting line to the captain and a mandate that the previous structure had made structurally impossible to actually investigate complaints rather than absorb them. Casper was promoted to sergeant. Rourke requested to be assigned to Okafor's division permanently. She said yes. The grand jury was convened on day 9. The indictment came on day 14. Felony assault under color of law. Deprivation of civil rights. filing false reports in 3 prior incidents. Evidence tampering 2 earlier body cam recordings, partially recovered from cloud backup under federal subpoena, showed Pullman stopping black male pedestrians on Clement Avenue's south end and conducting searches for which no probable cause was ever documented. The police union stopped returning Craig Pullman's calls on day 11. He was for the first time in 15 years entirely on his own. The trial of Craig Pullman lasted 10 weeks. The prosecutor, a woman named District Attorney Renee Blackwood, 44 years old, called 26 witnesses. She played 31 minutes of Casper's body cam footage, uncut, beginning to end. She called Tasha Greer. She called 3 other complainants whose cases had been marked unfounded and closed. She called Pete Rourke, who walked into the courtroom in full uniform and told the truth in a steady voice for 90 minutes without looking at Pullman once. She called Agnes Pruitt, who brought the folder of unanswered letters and set it on the rail of the witness stand like a closing argument before she had said a single word. The defense argued what defenses always argue in these cases. He was doing his job. Race had nothing to do with it. Context was missing from the footage. The jury, 10 women and 2 men, 7 of whom had grown up within 30 miles of Harlow Creek, deliberated for 4 hours and 19 minutes. Guilty. All counts. Sentencing 13 years federal prison. $2.8 million civil judgment. Permanent bar from law enforcement in any jurisdiction, any capacity for life. Forfeiture of pension. The courtroom did not erupt. It went quiet first, the specific quiet of people absorbing something that is both exactly what they hoped for and still somehow heavier than they expected. Then slowly, it filled with sound. Saul was sitting in the 3rd row. He had attended every day of the trial in the same navy suit that Agnes had helped him select at a department store in Decatur 6 weeks earlier and paid for without telling him until the receipt was already in the bag, and it was too late to argue. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and heard the verdict and closed his eyes for a moment. On the courthouse steps that afternoon, a reporter asked him what he was going to do with the civil judgment. Saul looked at her for a moment. He looked out at Clement Avenue 4 blocks north where the bench was. "Ma'am," he said, "I slept warm last night. That's more than a lot of men I know can say right now." He paused. "Give it to them." He signed the entire $2.8 million to the Decker Initiative the same afternoon. No ceremony. No press conference. A pen, a document, and Agnes sitting beside him at a table in the precinct conference room because he had asked her to be there, and she had not considered saying no. General Constance Webb held her press conference the following morning at the steps of Harlow Creek City Hall. She was 67 years old, 4-star retired, and she stood at the podium in full dress uniform with the particular posture of someone who has spent a lifetime making rooms pay attention. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She described November 9, 2004 in Fallujah. She described what she had seen in her forward operating base, the after-action report, the medical reports, the testimony of the soldiers Saul had carried across that open ground. She described writing the Medal of Honor recommendation at a field desk at 3 a.m. because she could not sleep until it was done. "There are 40,000 homeless veterans in this country tonight," she said near the end. "Some of them are carrying medals inside their jackets. Most of them are not. It does not matter." She looked directly into the cameras. "All of them served. All of them are ours. And we have failed them not as a government, not as an institution, but as people, as neighbors, as a town that flies the flag on every lamppost and cannot remember the name of the man sleeping under it." Mayor Harold Birch's public apology came the next day. He had been warned it would be covered, and he had decided to his credit not to perform it. He stood at the same podium without notes, and his voice broke twice once when he mentioned the key to the city he had presented Sol in 2007, and forgotten entirely, and once at the end when he announced the Beggar initiative, $15 million allocated for transitional housing, mental health services, and job reintegration for homeless veterans in Harlow Creek and 4 surrounding counties with an independent oversight board and a quarterly public audit. 2 other officers flagged during the internal review resigned rather than face their hearings. The precinct's complaint review process was restructured from the ground up. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in late September, a crowd gathered on Clement Avenue outside a renovated former church building with fresh white paint and new windows and a hand-lettered wooden sign above the door. Beggar House, transitional housing for veterans. Sol stood on the front steps in his Navy suit, the Medal of Honor pin on his lapel, the first time in 14 years he had worn it in public. He had decided the night before that the men and women who would walk through that door needed to see it. Needed to see that the person standing on those steps had been exactly where they were, and that it was not the end of the story. His knees still hurt. His nights were still hard sometimes. The therapist at the VA, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hale, Army veteran no-nonsense, 3 diplomas on her wall, and a very good listener, had told him there was no finish line, only tools. He had the tools now. He used them. He looked out at the crowd. Okafor was in the front row in dress blues. Casper beside her. Rourke 2 paces back. Moreau, Blackwood, Mayor Birch. Agnes holding a tray of biscuits because some things don't change and some things are not supposed to. Earl Stuckey in his VFW cap, straight-backed, his salute arm resting at his side, but ready. General Webb in full-dress uniform, 4 stars in the September sun. Deshaun Miles near the back phone in his pocket for once, just watching with the quiet attention of someone who understands that some moments are for being present and not for recording. Sol stepped to the microphone. He cleared his throat once. "I wasn't invisible because I was homeless," he said. His voice was quiet, and the crowd leaned in to catch every word. "I was invisible because people chose not to look. The men and women who are going to walk through that door don't need your pity. They don't need your thank you for your service when it's comfortable, and then nothing when it isn't." He paused. "They need your eyes. They need you to learn their names. They need you to say good morning like you mean it. That's where it starts. That's the whole thing." He picked up the scissors. He cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded slow and long and real. Afterward, Sol walked alone the 2 blocks south on Clement Avenue to the green bench. He sat on it one last time. He reached into his jacket pocket and found the small green notebook, a new one, same size, same brand, the old one lost to Pullman's hands, and the rain. He uncapped his pen. He wrote today's sentence. "Today someone said my name like they'd always known it." He closed the notebook. He sat for a moment in the September sun. Then he reached into his other pocket and touched the brass key, the key to his apartment on the 3rd floor of Beggar House, room 301, with a window that looked east toward the courthouse and caught the morning light. A boy ran past on the sidewalk, 8 years old, maybe 9, sneakers untied, and stopped dead when he saw Sol, the way children stop when something catches their complete attention. He raised his hand and waved with his whole arm, the uninhibited full-body wave of someone who has not yet learned to be selective about who deserves it. Sol raised his hand and waved back. The boy's father caught up slightly out of breath and put a hand on the boy's shoulder and looked up at Sol with the easy recognition of a neighbor. "That's Mr. Decker's son," he said. "He lives on our street." The boy nodded, satisfied, and ran on. Saul sat for another minute in the warmth. Then he stood, pressed the crease of his slacks flat with both hands out of 31 years of habit, and walked north on Clement Avenue toward home. The medals did not make Solomon Decker worthy of a salute. He was worthy on every cold morning he folded that blanket. Every morning he read 34 names on a wall. Every morning he wrote one true sentence in a green notebook and left an origami crane on a windowsill for a woman who kept them in a jar. The medals only forced the rest of us to stop lying to ourselves about what we had always been choosing not to see. If this story made you stop, really stop, drop a comment, and tell me who in your life you've been walking past. Not to perform it, just to say it out loud. And if you want more stories about the people this world overlooks, and the truth that eventually always finds its way to the surface, you know where to find us. We'll see you in the next one.